All right, so have you ever like been scrolling through your feed, and you come across one of those pictures that's just like a little extra,
Hmm.
you know what I'm talking about, the ones that are just like almost designed to like grab your attention,
Yeah.
maybe stir up a little something?
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about thirst traps, and we are diving deep into this fascinating Reddit thread that asks a very pointed question. Men in relationships, do you look at thirst
A
traps?
lot of responses.
Yeah, a ton of responses, and it's clear that this is something that like everyone's thinking about.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that it seems so simple, this question about these pictures online,
Yeah.
but then like it just opens up this whole can of worms
Yeah.
about like relationships and societal expectations and even how algorithms shape what we see online.
Right. So before we get into all of that,
Yeah.
let's make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, good idea.
When we say thirst trap, we're basically talking about a photo or a video, usually posted by women, that's meant to provoke a pretty strong reaction,
Right.
oftentimes a sexual reaction. We're talking about like poses, outfits,
Mm.
you get the picture.
Yeah.
But the real heart of this deep dive is figuring out, okay, so is looking at these thirst traps harmless,
Right.
like appreciating a nice piece of art, and then you just move on? Or is there something more to it?
Yeah, is it more complicated than that?
Yeah.
Well, and that's where this Reddit thread gets really juicy.
Okay.
A lot of the men were really adamant that it's just visual. They see it, maybe admire it for a second, and then they move on with their day. No emotional attachment.
Okay, so they're saying it's just like surface level.
Exactly, surface level.
Interesting.
Like one guy even compared it to seeing a possum in a parking lot.
What?
Like, you're surprised, maybe a little intrigued, but you don't, like, suddenly fall in love with the possum.
That's a good analogy.
Right, yeah. So it's like you can find something visually appealing without it impacting your emotional commitment to your partner.
Okay, but then there was this other side to the thread
Yes.
where a lot of these guys were actually frustrated because the algorithms keep shoving this content in their faces,
Yeah,
even if they're online for like completely different things like cars,
right.
dogs, like whatever.
Totally, and that's where we start to see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
It makes you question how much control we really have over our online experience.
It really does.
Are these algorithms just mirroring our desires,
Yeah.
or are they actively shaping them?
Right. Are they manipulating us?
Yeah, and maybe even excluding our weaknesses.
Like one guy was saying he mostly uses Instagram to share vacation photos,
Uh-huh.
but he's constantly bombarded with like suggestive content.
Yeah, it's like you can't escape it.
Right. Like talk about a buzzkill.
It makes you think, are we really in control online?
Yeah.
Or are we being like subtly manipulated?
Right.
To like, and what happens if that bleeds into our offline lives, our relationships?
Well, and speaking of relationships,
Yes.
you can't ignore this whole double standard debate that came up.
Oh, absolutely.
Several women were calling out this idea that it's okay for men to look at thirst traps,
Hmm.
but their partners shouldn't be posting similar stuff.
Yeah, and it's a valid point that goes straight to the heart of like general dynamics
Yeah,
and how society views female sexuality.
right. Like women get judged so much more for expressing themselves openly,
Exactly.
but men get a free pass.
It's a double standard for sure.
Yeah, one woman even talked about feeling inadequate
Oh, wow.
because of all these hot girl images everywhere.
It's tough out there.
It is. And it's like there's this pressure to live up to these unrealistic standards.
Right.
While men are over here double tapping with no repercussions.
Yeah, it really highlights the need to re-examine some of these societal norms.
For sure.
And have honest conversations about their impact on both men and women, because
Yeah.
these double standards don't just hurt women.
Right?
Limit men, too.
They do. And then there's the elephant in the room.
Okay.
How does all this impact actual relationship?
Right. The real-world consequences.
Yeah, a lot of commenters were worried about thirst traps leading to comparisons,
Mm.
unrealistic expectations, even a redirection of sexual energy.
Yeah, and psychologically, those concerns make a lot of sense. When
Yeah.
we're constantly bombarded with these idealized images,
Mhm.
it's easy to start feeling insecure or dissatisfied with our own partners.
Right. Like, imagine you're looking at a dessert menu after you've already ordered a perfectly delicious meal.
Okay.
And you're admiring all these fancy creations.
Right.
It might make you question your choice, even if you were perfectly happy with it, the boy.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And just like that dessert menu might mess with your appetite,
Right?
these thirst traps, they have the potential to impact our relationships in ways we might not even realize at first.
Definitely. And that's what makes this whole conversation so important.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us to one of like the biggest concerns
Okay.
that came up in the Reddit thread, Could thirst traps actually lead to infidelity,
Oh, wow.
emotional or physical?
Right. And it's not even just about like the act of cheating itself,
Right.
but like that slow erosion of trust and intimacy
Exactly.
that can happen when one partner feels like the other is constantly looking for validation outside the relationship.
Yeah, it makes you think, even if it's just looking, is there some kind of mental checkout from the relationship happening?
Yeah.
And could that be a slippery slope towards wanting more
Right.
than just a visual thrill?
That's a tough question.
It is.
And I feel like there's no easy answer.
No, not at all.
I think every couple has to kind of figure out
Right.
what works for them,
Yeah,
but it seems like open communication and clear boundaries are pretty crucial.
absolutely. And what I found really encouraging was that a lot of the men in the thread weren't just like trying to justify looking at thirst traps.
Okay.
They seemed genuinely interested in having a healthier relationship with online content in general.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it suggests a willingness to be self-aware
Uh-huh.
and acknowledge the potential downsides of like overconsumption.
Yeah, like recognizing that maybe you're going a little overboard
Exactly.
and it's actually taking away from other parts of your life.
One guy even mentioned that he actively avoids following models or influencers online
Interesting.
because he wants to focus his attention on things that are more meaningful to him.
That makes sense.
It's like recognizing that constantly feeding that visual hunger
Right.
might actually be taking away from other more important things.
It's like you're snacking all day, but you never sit down to like a nourishing meal.
Exactly. You might feel full in the moment,
Yeah.
but it's not truly satisfying.
Not in the long run.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, like, what happens when we're constantly bombarded with these idealized images?
Yeah. Do we become numb to it?
Could we actually become desensitized over
Yeah.
time?
Like that saying, familiarity breeds contempt.
Right.
Like if you see something enough, it just loses its power.
And a lot of men were actually saying that.
Really?
Like, with the volume of thirst traps online now,
Yeah.
they've become less impactful.
Interesting.
One guy even said he's seen so many women in like various states of undress online that he's basically numb to it.
Wow.
It's just background noise.
That's wild.
It is. It makes you wonder, what does that say about our culture
Yeah.
and how we view sexuality?
Right. Are we becoming so inundated with these perfect airbrushed images
Mm-hmm.
that we're losing our capacity for genuine intimacy?
That it's a crucial question, and I think it speaks to the importance of being mindful of our digital diets.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just like we need to be conscious of what we're putting into our bodies physically. We need to be aware of what we're consuming mentally and emotionally.
So after all of this, like, where do we land?
Right.
The original question is, looking at thirst traps inherently bad?
I don't think there's a simple yes or no answer.
Yeah.
Like most things, context is key.
Right.
It depends on your own values, the dynamics of your relationship, and your ability to manage your online consumption in a healthy way.
Right. It's about being honest with yourself about why you're looking,
Yeah.
what your boundaries are, and the potential impact on your relationship.
And if you find that thirst traps are causing conflict or discomfort,
Mm-hmm.
that's a clear sign it's time to have an open and honest conversation with your partner.
Yeah, because ultimately it's about building trust and intimacy,
Exactly.
not letting online distractions get in the way.
Right. And it's fascinating how this Reddit thread,
Yeah.
even though it started with a kind of a controversial question,
Uh-huh.
it sparked a really important conversation about relationships in a digital world.
It's a good reminder that we need to be mindful of what we consume online
Absolutely.
and prioritize those real-life connections.
Yeah, over those fleeting digital thrills.
But in a world that's like saturated with visual stimuli,
Right.
how do we define those healthy boundaries
Mhm.
and maintain those meaningful connections?
That's a question worth pondering.
It is,
And I hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
for sure. And as we wrap up, I just want to thank everyone for joining us on Voices of the Soul.
Yes, thank you.
We are so passionate about bringing you these thought-provoking conversations.
We are.
And if you're enjoying this deep dive, please consider subscribing to the podcast.
Yes, and if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that like button and subscribe to Shauna Pullige's channel for more deep dives into the topics that matter most.
We really appreciate your support in helping us reach a wider audience. Yeah, it's like we're all just trying to like figure out the recipe,
Yeah,
for like fulfilling digital life,
right.
but without having to sacrifice all those rich offline relationships.
It's a tough balance.
It is.
It really is. And I think, this whole deep dive into the world of thirst traps and how they impact relationships
Mhm.
has brought up some really crucial points. We've talked about how men in relationships view this content online. those pesky algorithms that
Yeah.
kind of shape what we see,
Uh-huh.
and all those valid concerns about double standards and, the potential fallout for real-life connections.
Yeah, and we also talked about how all that visual stimulation can really impact us psychologically.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the desensitization we were talking about.
Right. Could we become numb to it all?
Yeah, or even just feeling inadequate or dissatisfied in our own relationships.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah,
And I think, through all of this,
yeah,
the biggest takeaway for me is
Yeah.
that there's no right answer.
Yeah.
Like most things in life, it really depends on the context.
right.
Your own values, how your relationship works, and whether you can manage your online life in a healthy way.
Right, like what works for one person might not work for another.
Right, exactly.
So as we kind of leave you to think about all of this,
Yeah.
here's the final thought.
Okay.
In this world that's so saturated with all these images,
Uh-huh.
where do you draw the line
Right.
between like appreciating beauty and setting healthy boundaries?
Mm.
How do we make sure that what we're doing online is actually adding to our real life relationships
Yeah.
and not taking away from them?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And I think it's a question we all need to be thinking about.
You do?
So thank you so much for joining us on Voices of the Soul.
Yes, thank you everyone for listening.
We hope this deep dive has, given you some insights, maybe even sparked some interesting conversations.
Yeah, go talk to your partner.
Exactly. Offline conversations are important too.
They are. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button
Yeah,
and leave us a comment. We love hearing from you.
absolutely. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Shauna Polich for even more deep dives into all those questions that matter most.
Yes, thank you again, everyone.